Riverside was the kind of place people often dreamed about when they thought of small-town America. The streets were lined with neat houses, white fences, and freshly cut lawns. In the evenings, porch lights glowed warmly as neighbors waved to one another, and children played hide-and-seek until their parents called them in for dinner. It was a town where everyone seemed to know each other's names, where gossip at the diner was more likely about high school football scores than crime or scandal. For decades, Riverside had been described as safe, ordinary, even dull in the best possible way. That calm reputation was what made the changes so unsettling when they first began. At first, it was nothing people could put their finger on. There were whispers about strange noises in the woods at night, shadows moving just outside the reach of street lamps, and an uneasy feeling when walking home alone after dark. People laughed it off, telling themselves it was just nerves, just the imagination playing tricks. But the unease kept growing, and eventually the rumors began to form into something sharper, something harder to ignore. The first signs were almost harmless. A neighbor's dog, always seen roaming the yard, suddenly disappeared. A few days later, a family cat was gone, too. In a town where pets were beloved and often treated like children, the losses stung deeply. Some assumed coyotes were to blame. Others insisted it was nothing more than animals wandering off. Yet deep down, many residents couldn't shake the sense that someone had taken them. Not long after, an abandoned car was discovered at the edge of a wooded road. Its windows were rolled down, and the keys still dangled in the ignition. Inside were fast food wrappers, a half-empty water bottle, and a phone charger plugged into the console. But there was no sign of the driver. The police towed the car away and opened a missing person case, but no one came forward to claim it. The vehicle seemed to belong to someone who didn't live in Riverside, someone who had vanished without a trace. As weeks passed, more odd reports trickled in. Residents began spotting a man walking late at night along the back roads, always dressed in dark clothing and carrying what looked like a large black duffel bag. He never spoke to anyone, never looked up, and seemed to vanish whenever headlights came near. Teenagers started daring one another to follow him, but no one ever got close. The man seemed to slip away like smoke, leaving behind nothing but fear and unanswered questions. Though the police fielded calls, there was little they could do. No laws were being broken by someone walking at night, and no evidence tied the strange figure to the missing pets or the abandoned car. Still, the unease was spreading. People who had never locked their doors before began sliding deadbolts into place. Parents kept their children closer, warning them not to wander off, even during the day. The sense of safety Riverside had always taken for granted was unraveling, thread by thread. What no one realized was that these small signs were only the beginning. A storm was brewing quietly, just beneath the surface. The town was being watched, studied, and stalked. And soon the people of Riverside would learn that the monster they whispered about was not a story told to scare children. Oh, it was real, it was walking among them, and it was already preparing to strike. The discovery of the backpack marked the first real clue that something terrible was happening in Riverside. It was found by accident early on a Saturday morning when a local man was out for a jog on one of the popular trails near the edge of town. At first, he thought the worn-out bag had simply been tossed aside by a careless hiker. But when he unzipped it, the sight inside froze him where he stood. The clothes were soaked in dried blood, and among them was a wallet with a student ID. The name belonged to a young man from a nearby college who had been reported missing 2 weeks earlier. Police were quick to secure the area, combing the forest floor for anything else that might point to what had happened. Tire tracks were discovered not far from the trail, pressed deep into the dirt, leading toward a secluded path that disappeared into thick trees. Investigators suspected that a vehicle had been driven there recently, likely during the night. Something about the placement of the tracks felt deliberate, as if the driver had chosen that spot for a reason. The wallet inside the bag was a breakthrough, but it also raised more questions. Why had it been left in such a visible place, only partially buried in leaves? Was it carelessness, or was someone taunting the authorities? Detectives knew they were not dealing with a random disappearance. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure this student would not be found, and the backpack was their first breadcrumb. In the days that followed, officers canvassed nearby neighborhoods and checked surveillance footage from every gas station and traffic camera in a 10-mile radius. It didn't take long before a chilling image surfaced. On a grainy recording from a store camera, a hooded figure was seen dragging a large, heavy object wrapped in fabric toward the forest line. His face was angled away from the lens, but the outline of a duffel bag was unmistakable. The duffel bag immediately became a symbol of dread in Riverside. Witnesses began to come forward with unsettling stories. Some remembered seeing the man wandering along the back roads late at night, always with the same bag slung over his shoulder. Others swore they had glimpsed him vanishing into the woods just before dawn. Every account painted the same picture, a silent, determined figure who never seemed to rest. Detectives now believed they were dealing with a predator who had been moving quietly through Riverside for longer than anyone realized. The missing pets, the abandoned car, the strange sightings, everything began to fit together. The bag was more than just a container. It was his signature, the constant element in every report, a reminder that he could appear anywhere at any time. As tension built, the town grew restless. Rumors spread quickly, feeding the fear. Some whispered that the man lived among them, blending in during the day and stalking the streets at night. Others believed he was an outsider who had chosen Riverside as his hunting ground. Police increased patrols, but no one knew when or where he would strike next. The most frightening thought of all was that this suspect was not simply hiding evidence in the woods. He was returning to the same places again and again, revisiting them like they were part of a ritual. And if he had buried one backpack, investigators feared there could be others waiting to be uncovered, each one telling a darker story than the last. Police knew they could no longer wait for chance encounters or random discoveries. If they wanted to catch the man behind the bag, they would need to lure him out and witness his actions firsthand. The forest where the backpack was found became the center of the investigation. Officers studied the layout, marked the tire tracks, and analyzed the narrow paths that twisted deeper into the woods. Everything suggested that the suspect was familiar with the area. He returned often, and that meant he could be predicted. The decision was made to conduct a stakeout. It wasn't easy. The woods were dense, filled with insects, and eerily silent once the sun went down. Officers disguised themselves as hikers and campers, blending in during the day to avoid suspicion. At night, they rotated shifts, sitting in unmarked cars with their headlights off, eyes fixed on the trail entrances. The plan was simple: wait and watch. If the man came back, they would be ready. For the first 3 nights, nothing happened. The silence was maddening. Every snapping branch or rustle of leaves made officers tense, only for it to be a deer or stray animal. The longer they waited without seeing the suspect, the more doubt crept in. Had he moved on to another area? Had he realized the police were onto him? Some feared they were wasting valuable time while he targeted another victim elsewhere. But on the 4th night, the quiet broke. Just after midnight, one of the officers noticed a faint beam of light moving through the trees. It was subtle, barely visible from the road, but it grew brighter as it approached the clearing near the trail. A man was walking steadily, a flashlight in one hand and the black duffel bag slung heavily over his shoulder. He moved with confidence, as if he knew the ground beneath his feet by heart. Officers held their breath as they tracked him from a distance. The man never looked around, never hesitated. He reached a patch of dirt near the same place the backpack had been uncovered and began digging furiously with a small shovel pulled from his bag. The sound of metal striking earth echoed faintly through the night. To the investigators, it was a chilling confirmation that this was not some wanderer with harmless intentions. This was the man they had been hunting. For nearly an hour, he worked in silence, pulling out ropes and a bundle wrapped in fabric. His actions were methodical, almost rehearsed, like someone following a carefully memorized routine. The officers crept closer, careful to stay hidden behind trees, their flashlights off, radios silenced. The tension was unbearable. Any wrong move could alert him and send him fleeing into the night. As they closed the distance, the horrifying reality became clear. The bundle was moving. Something inside it shifted weakly against the ropes. The man knelt down, adjusting the bindings with a precision that revealed both experience and cruelty. The officers exchanged urgent signals. They were no longer simply watching a crime scene unfold. They were witnessing an attempted murder in real time. At that moment, the stakeout was no longer about gathering evidence. It had turned into a race against time, a desperate effort to save whoever was trapped inside that bundle before it was too late. When the officers finally surged forward, the quiet forest exploded into chaos. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, beams converging on the figure in the clearing. The man jerked his head up, momentarily frozen by the sudden light, his shovel still clutched in one hand. At his feet lay the bundle ropes wound tightly around a young woman's wrists and ankles. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. She was alive, but her strength was slipping fast. The suspect reacted too slowly. Before he could move, officers tackled him, forcing him to the ground with the weight of their body. His shovel clattered across the dirt, landing just inches from the bound woman. The struggle was violent but brief. He thrashed against the hands that restrained him, his breath harsh in the still night, but there was no escape. Within moments, his wrists were bound in handcuffs, his flashlight rolling uselessly into the underbrush. As he was pulled upright, the most unsettling detail revealed itself. His face, no longer hidden by shadows, was blank, expressionless, almost serene. There was no fear, no desperation, not even anger. He stared calmly at the officers restraining him, as if he had expected this moment all along. The quiet composure in his eyes unsettled even the most experienced among them. It was the look of someone who felt no remorse, someone who believed he was still in control even as the law closed in around him. Meanwhile, another officer rushed to the young woman. The ropes cut deep into her skin, leaving angry red marks. Her mouth was sealed with heavy tape, her eyes wide and pleading. She trembled as the officer carefully peeled the tape away and loosened the knots that held her. Weak and barely able to stand, she gasped for air, clinging to her rescuer's arm as though afraid she might be dragged back at any second. The reality of how close she had come to death sank into everyone present. A few minutes later, and she would have been lowered into the shallow grave the suspect had been digging. The scene was grim. The dirt around the pit was freshly disturbed, the outline of a hole deep enough to hide a body. The bag, now lying open, contained rope, duct tape, and a small collection of tools wrapped in cloth. Everything inside suggested careful planning, a ritual prepared in advance. This was not a crime of passion or chance. It was methodical, rehearsed, and terrifyingly precise. Officers secured the scene, photographing every detail while others led the man toward a waiting vehicle. He did not resist. He walked silently, head held high, as though the flashing lights and shouts of command meant nothing. Even as he was pushed into the back of the patrol car, he never looked away from the clearing where the woman had been found. The intensity of his gaze lingered long after the door slammed shut. In the hours that followed, the rescue spread quickly across Riverside. Word traveled that the predator who had haunted their nights was not just a shadow, but a man who had been caught in the very act of preparing his victim's final moments. Relief swept through the community, but it was mixed with something heavier, a chilling awareness that evil had been living among them, hidden in plain sight. For the officers, the memory of that night would never fade. They had expected to catch a suspect returning to cover his tracks. Instead, they found themselves interrupting a murder in progress. It was a victory, but also a reminder of just how close Riverside had come to another tragedy, buried in silence. The man who had terrorized Riverside was soon identified as Leonard Price, a 42-year-old mechanic who lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. On the surface, he was ordinary, someone who fixed cars during the day and kept mostly to himself. He had no serious criminal record, no history of violence that would have warned anyone about what he was capable of. To neighbors, he was polite but distant, a man who nodded in greeting but rarely stayed to talk. Nothing about him hinted at the darkness investigators were about to uncover. When officers entered his home with a search warrant, they were met with a chilling sight. The house was spotless, unnaturally clean, almost sterile. In the living room, there were no family photos, no signs of warmth or comfort. It was as if the house itself had been stripped of personality. The real horror was discovered in the basement. Down a narrow set of stairs, investigators found a hidden room that looked more like a workshop than a storage space. The walls were lined with shelves holding ropes, duct tape, knives, and heavy plastic sheets. On a wooden table, maps of Riverside and its surrounding forests were carefully marked with circles and notes. Each mark represented a location where Leonard had hunted. Even more disturbing were the photographs pinned neatly to a cork board. Some were of missing persons whose names had surfaced in police reports. Others were unknown. Many of the images had been taken from a distance, blurry shots of individuals walking to their cars, jogging along trails, or sitting on park benches. Leonard had been watching, cataloging, and planning long before anyone realized. The photographs turned the investigation from a single crime into the possibility of a series of calculated hunts. As detectives pieced together the evidence, a terrifying pattern emerged. Leonard had used the same method repeatedly, stalking his victims, isolating them in remote areas, and preparing burial sites in advance. The duffel bag that had become his signature was more than just a tool. It was part of his identity, the portable kit that allowed him to carry out his ritual wherever he chose. The woman rescued in the woods had narrowly escaped becoming another name on his hidden list. News of the discovery spread quickly, and Riverside's sense of safety shattered completely. Families who once left their doors unlocked now installed alarms. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them ride alone. The idea that a quiet, unassuming man had been living among them, carrying out his twisted plans in silence, left a scar on the community that would not heal easily. When Leonard was brought to trial, the courtroom was filled with people desperate to understand how someone they had passed on the street for years could harbor such cruelty. Prosecutors presented the photographs, the tools, and the maps, painting a picture of a man who had turned killing into a methodical routine. Leonard sat motionless through it all, never breaking the same calm expression he had worn the night he was caught. In the end, his downfall came not through brilliant police work or advanced technology, but through his own arrogance. He had returned to the forest confident that his ritual would continue without interruption. Instead, he walked straight into a trap and revealed himself in the most damning way possible, caught in the act of burying his next victim alive. For Riverside, the arrest brought closure, but also a sobering reminder. Evil does not always announce itself with violence or warning. Sometimes it hides behind a calm face, a tidy house, and a quiet routine waiting for the right moment to strike. The town would never forget the night Leonard Price was unmasked, and the haunting truth that their sense of safety had been shattered not by a stranger from far away, but by a neighbor who had been among them all along.